We often have conversations about crime in the city, and 2 weeks ago we discussed what role or legal obligation, if any, the Baltimore City or other governments have to protect citizens, and what legal obligations district attorneys have to prosecute suspects. You can find that interview on my YouTube page, Kevin Battle. The timing is interesting because one of the big stories last week in the Baltimore Banner was about the shortage of staff, fatigue, overtime work, stretched resources of firefighters, medics, and first responders in emergency situations in Baltimore City. And it came out just a few days before last Sunday, July 2nd shooting in the Brooklyn neighborhood that left 2 dead and 28 injured. And that required a massive response of medics, obviously and unfortunately. So joining us today is Josh Fannin, president of the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters, Local 964, Baltimore Fire Officers. Good evening, President Fannin. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
So summer is always busy for firefighters and EMS with errant barbecues and fireworks and also fights, shooting, stabbings. Yet the atmosphere at area firehouses must be pretty tense or fatigued after reportedly a third of engine and truck companies were out of service recently. Serious staffing issues have been apparently simmering for a while, but now they're boiling over. What's the situation?
Well, we have a multifaceted problem on our hands. We have apparatus shortage like we've never experienced in the history of the fire department. The apparatus is the general term for referring to the engines, the trucks that bring the firefighters to the scene, that carry specialized equipment. We have more of those out of service than we ever have, and we're having trouble. We're having them repaired in a timely fashion. We're also having trouble replacing them because as time goes on, like a car, they only have a certain lifespan, so they need to be replaced. We're way behind schedule on replacement, and we've also, to compound that problem, been experiencing, like many industries, a dwindling workforce, and now we're trying to replace a large number of people who have been retiring or leaving for other reasons. So we're having trouble having enough staff for the units, and at times having units for them to staff.
That's amazing. Now, when a fast food restaurant has a staffing shortage, people wait a couple of minutes for their meals. But when professionals like first responders and firefighters, people who are trained to go into burning buildings and help in emergency situations or rectify emergency situations, that's disastrous for a community. I was reading at Fire Apparatus magazine that the department has, and you're not kidding, 30% fewer apparatus than needed or desired.
That sounds like a good estimate. One of the things that people may or may not be aware of is when you're speaking about that response in the community, there's a standard for career fire departments. It's called NFPA 1710. It's the industry standard. And the way that we are supposed to staff the apparatus is also tied to the length of time that it takes us to travel to the scene and arrive with enough personnel and equipment to perform these duties, which could include fire extinguishment and suppression and search and rescue and all of those tasks that go along with it. And if we're not making it to the scene in a timely fashion, then we're not able to perform our job up to the industry standard that's been set for the whole country.
So with the shortage recently of EMS and first responders, the firefighters have to backfill that staffing issue, do they not?
Yes, the EMS and fire are both provided to the citizens of Baltimore through the Baltimore City Fire Department. Generally speaking, in a lot of different places where you have staffing, there's a staffing factor where you have to have a few extra people per so many to compensate for people who are out sick, injured, on vacation. And EMS has never had a staffing factor. What I mean is there's 2 personnel assigned to every emergency medical service transport unit, whether it's advanced life support or basic life support. But there's only 2. So if one of those people is off sick, injured, vacation, or whatever, the backfill for that position is going to be pulled from the fire suppression side. A firefighter would be detailed to that medic unit. So our staffing factor being non-existent in EMS is a problem already because we need to have additional personnel than are already on the books just to be able to staff appropriately. And since we don't have that, every person who's not there is going to create a vacancy. On top of that, we have a tremendous amount of vacancies, particularly paramedics who provide advanced life support.
And you probably need mechanics, too, just a basic mechanic work, I would imagine, if some of the apparatus needs fixed.
Absolutely. And we don't actually, that used to be a division of the fire department, but that's going back many decades ago. We have not been responsible for that for a long time.
Okay, so that's subbed out then.
The Department of General Services that does maintenance on vehicles for the city of Baltimore has a division that does work on fire apparatus and medic units specifically. However, one of the things that came out of a hearing that the city council called, the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee called in December, and they revealed that they had, I can't remember the exact number, but it was a very significant number. It might have been 40 or 50% vacancy rate in skilled mechanics that would perform that kind of labor. So they had a vacancy too. So then we start backing up and getting it fixed at Department of General Services, and then they subcontracted out to different private vendors in the area, but there's only so many of those. So then they're getting backed up because they're also servicing other jurisdictions around here, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Howard County, and the like.
I think everything sort of came to light publicly after the Stricker Street fire, that deadly fire that killed 3 firefighters, and the chief resigned. That's, I think, when the public started seeing things. But this past weekend, when 30% of the operations had to go to a brownout, I guess, that really puts a dot on things as well. Money, is that an issue? I read that you're getting about $3 million more next year.
Well, money's definitely always going to be an issue, right? Because you need money to run, whether it's paying employees or more specifically paying for enough billeted positions to have the staffing. That's one thing. To have the money to purchase apparatus, the money to maintain the apparatus, those are other things. We were very pleased with the City Council's decision to increase funding for replacement apparatus, building maintenance, and other priorities. One of the problems that we run into there too, still, even with enough money, is that, one, the apparatus manufacturers are falling very far behind in how quickly they can fill orders, how long it takes for them to have a check in hand and build a fire truck. I think the last I heard was it takes about 36 months lead time from start to finish, and that's because of having to get in line behind so many people across the country. Yeah, it used to be fire engines from one of our manufacturers used to be built in 6 weeks, like clockwork, and they've backed up that far. The other thing is when we have in the budget funding for these billeted minimum positions, but we still have a very high vacancy rate, very high. Last I was told, it was 10%. We were operating at a point where we could really operate off of 2% vacancy rate and backfilling with overtime. But when you multiply that 5 times where we're at today, we just can't do it anymore.
That's unbelievable. It's not an issue of slow walking hiring or just promising overtime to veterans or anything like that. This is a serious manpower issue, a supply chain issue. It's everything hitting at once, apparently.
Well, in fairness, I think you do make a good point about slow walking hiring. I think the hiring could be much more aggressive. We did just open up entry-level firefighter hiring for the month of June. That closed, I believe, July 2nd. I haven't been informed on how many applicants they got. But my suggestion to city government, to the Baltimore City Fire Department, would be to really ramp up that hiring. Like the next step in the process after applications would be a written test. That needs to happen ASAP. There is no reason for a delay in that. And another thing is they need to take a hard look at all the classes that they're giving new recruits in the fire academy to see if there's any waste that can be trimmed down. And they also need to increase the class sizes or run more than one class at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Absolutely. Public safety's on the line, and I'm sure they're pretty decent paying jobs when you start out, entry-level jobs with the firefighter. I'm sure it's a city salary and decent benefits, but a lot of work as well. Public safety, I just mentioned that. What is the response time now? Has it been dropping? And should the people of Baltimore worry that help may not come if necessary?
Well, I am not privy to those exact numbers, but I can tell you, according to the NFPA standard, we're supposed to have a full response for a dwelling fire within 8 to 9 minutes. And if we're able to do that on a normal day with the firehouse locations we have, with the number of units they're supposed to have, with the staffing they're supposed to have, and now we find ourselves in a day where some of those units are not in service, because we don't have the personnel or we don't have the apparatus, whatever it is. The only way for us to get enough units on the scene is for them to respond from further away. And I remember seeing many times in the news over the years when we were facing brownouts at a much lower rate, by the way. The typical line to respond was, this will not affect response times, this will not affect public safety, and that is completely false. Because if you have to travel from further away and seconds count, how could that not be affected negatively?
It's just simple common sense. I mean, it's an absolute lie
Absolutely.
if somebody says that doesn't affect response times.
Exactly.
What about consolidation? We see offices, buildings, churches consolidate, merge with other municipalities. Will reimagining deployment and location of resources occur? That would affect response times as well.
Well, so one of the interesting things with the history of the fire service in the United States particularly is that it is a non-consolidated operation for that reason, is that we have to respond in a certain number of minutes or seconds in all the neighborhoods that we cover. So there was an idea, and I think it mostly came from a European concept in the 60s, 70s, where they would take, instead of having, let's say, 3 firehouses spread out, if you combined all of them into a bigger firehouse and all those units were there. Normally what happens when they do that is they end up eliminating a unit or two while they're doing it. But second, they're all responding from a specific location. So to cover that same area is, again, going to be a longer response than you would have had with a single engine here and a single engine there going to the same place or covering the same geographic area. So consolidation in the fire service does not work. That is not a good idea.
It is not really a job. It is a calling, a lifestyle, a commitment to service. It's dangerous, but people love it. There's a passion there. There's a pride in performance as well. What can somebody do if they would like to become a firefighter in Baltimore City today? How can they get on the truck?
Well, like I said, they just were accepting applications for a firefighter for the whole month of June. I believe they're going to take a look at how many applications they received and see if they're going to open that up again. So I would say it's going to be keeping a close eye on that hiring process and when the applications are open. I think that it just closed, but they may be opening it up again soon. And that's not the only entry-level position either. We have firefighters, we have EMTs, and we have paramedics. Now, paramedics do have advanced life support training. If you're hired as a paramedic, you would have had additional schooling and certification already. So that's a specific audience. But EMTs and firefighters, you can have no experience. You just want to get involved. You want to do that, you want to feel that call, then you would just apply, go through that process successfully and start working at the fire academy and learn how to do it. And we'll take care of the rest.
You've obviously had discussions with the mayor. Was hiring brought up for the firefighters?
Yeah, we've definitely had a lot of conversations with the mayor about it. And in fact, we were just having a conversation about that this morning. And unfortunately, we're not the only ones that are having trouble getting enough people, but it's definitely on the mayor's radar, and it is definitely something that he would like to see addressed. And I do believe that he understands and appreciates the work that the fire department does and knows that we are really in desperate need of more staffing at the entry level, for sure.
Is there anything that our listeners can do, or is that out of their hands?
Well, that's never out of your hands. I mean, if the public safety is of concern to you and these units being closed, I speaking more generally, I don't know anybody who's on the city council or state legislature that's a local elected official who does not take those concerns seriously. So if it is of something that somebody that's listening is willing to take the time to do, look up your local legislator, your local council person, the mayor, make contact, reach out, let them know that this is in fact something that's important to you, and that will just absolutely help amplify our message, I think.
Josh Fannin, president of the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters, Local 964, Baltimore Fire Officers. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, and our best and our thanks to you and Baltimore's Bravest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate you taking the time to hear from me.